When he left the orphanage on his 18th birthday, they said he inherited a sealed Cooperage. What he discovered inside would change everything. It's a story about how the places we think are abandoned are sometimes just waiting for us to come home. If you've ever felt lost or like you're starting over from zero, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button because we're going to get into it, and I want you to be here for the journey. The air in Mr. Henderson's office always smelled the same: stale coffee, cheap disinfectant, and the quiet desperation of paperwork that never ended. It was the smell of my entire life, institutional and sterile. I sat in the chair I'd been sitting in since I was 8, the one with the permanent vinyl squeak and the slight wobble in the back left leg. Except today was different. Today I was 18, legal, an adult, a free man, if you could call someone with $74 in their pocket and a single duffel bag to their name free. Mr. Henderson, a man whose face was a permanent roadmap of weary sympathy, slid a thick manila envelope across his desk. It stopped just short of my hands, a beige island on a sea of faux wood grain. "Leo, this is it," he said, his voice trying for cheerful and landing somewhere near tired. "Happy birthday." I didn't say thank you. The words felt hollow. Happy birthday was for kids with cake and wrapping paper, not for a file being closed. I looked at the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. "What is it?" I asked. My own voice sounded foreign, a low rumble in the quiet room. For 10 years, my voice had been mostly for answering questions. "Yes, sir." "No, ma'am." "I'm fine." "It's from a lawyer," he said, leaning back. The chair groaned in protest. "A Ms. Albright, up in Port Blossom. It arrived about a week ago, with instructions not to give it to you until today." Port Blossom. The name was like a ghost on my tongue. A place I hadn't let myself think about in a decade. A place of salt spray and foghorns, and a splintered memory of a calloused hand holding mine. My grandfather's town. My grandfather's hand. Before he vanished. Before the system swallowed me whole. I reached out and pulled the envelope toward me. My name was typed on the front. Leo Vance. No "in care of," no "state ward," just my name, like I was a real person. "What's it about?" I asked, my fingers tracing the sharp corners. "Your grandfather's property," Mr. Henderson said, his eyes softening. He knew the story. He'd been the one to process my intake file all those years ago. He knew the official version. Grandfather, my sole guardian after my parents' accident, had abandoned me, went out for groceries one day and never came back. The authorities searched. They found his truck by the side of a highway 100 miles south a week later. No note, no sign of him. Just an empty vehicle and an 8-year-old boy who was now a ward of the state. "He had property?" I said, the question hanging in the air. I always assumed he had nothing. We lived in a small rented apartment above a bait shop. The smell of fish and brine was the scent of my childhood. "Apparently so. A cooperage, his workshop." Henderson shrugged, a gesture that said this was all news to him too. According to the letter, it was legally sealed under some kind of protective trust right after he disappeared. The trust expired today, on your 18th birthday. It's yours now, Leo, free and clear. Well, he corrected himself, tapping a finger on the desk, mostly clear. I tore open the envelope. There was a thick sheaf of papers held together with a clip, a rusted, old-fashioned key on a loop of twine, and a folded letter on top, written on heavy, cream-colored stationery. The key was iron, heavy in my palm. its teeth worn smooth in places. It looked like a key from a fairy tale, the kind that opens a forgotten door. I unfolded the letter. The type was crisp, from a typewriter, not a computer. "Dear Mr. Vance," it began, formal and distant. "My name is Evelyn Albright. I was your grandfather, Arthur Vance's attorney, and, I hope, his friend. As per his final instructions, I am informing you that as of today, your 18th birthday, you are the sole legal heir to his property, located at 417 Waterfront Road, Port Blossom. The property consists of the land and the primary structure, a cooperage, which has been held in a protective trust for the last 10 years. The letter went on to explain the legal jargon, the whys and hows of the trust. It was a mechanism Arthur had set up years before, a fail-safe. If he were to be declared missing or deceased, the property would be locked down, untouchable by creditors or the state, until I came of age. There was a catch, of course. There's always a catch. Please be advised, the letter continued, that while the property itself is unencumbered by mortgage, a significant amount of back taxes has accrued over the past decade. The sum is substantial. The township will expect a payment plan or a settlement in full within the next 90 days, or they will move to seize the property and auction it. Underneath that paragraph was a number. It had a comma in it. It was more money than I had ever imagined seeing in one place. It was an impossible, suffocating number. So I hadn't inherited a home. I'd inherited a debt. A final, cruel joke from the man who'd left me. My throat felt tight. I looked up from the letter at Mr. Henderson. He was watching me, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. "It also came with this," he said, sliding a second, smaller envelope across the desk. This one was a standard bus station ticket sleeve. Inside was a one-way ticket to Port Blossom. "The lawyer sent it. It's for tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. I stared at the ticket, then at the key, then at the impossible number on the page. Freedom. It felt a lot like a trap. I had $74, a bus ticket to a town I barely remembered, and a key to a building I couldn't afford to keep. For a moment, a wave of pure, hot rage washed over me. Rage at my grandfather for leaving me this puzzle box of hope and debt. What was I supposed to do? Show up, unlock the door, and then hand the key over to the tax man? "You don't have to go, Leo," Mr. Henderson said softly, as if reading my mind. "There's the transitional housing program in the city. You've got a spot if you want it. You could get a job, get on your feet. You could just let the property go. No one would blame you." His words were sensible. They were the logical path, the safe path. Stay in the city, where I knew the grid of the streets, where I knew how the system worked. Survive. That's what I'd been doing for 10 years. Surviving. But the iron key felt warm in my hand. It was a real object, a tangible link to a life before the group home, before the squeaking vinyl chair, before I learned to make myself small and quiet so no one would notice me. It was a piece of him, of Arthur Vance, the man who taught me how to skip stones and identify seabirds, the man who smelled of sawdust and sea salt. What if he hadn't abandoned me? The question was a heresy, a thought I hadn't allowed myself to have in a decade. It was easier to believe in the simple, cruel story of abandonment. It was clean. It was understandable. Anything else was messy, complicated. But the key, the trust, the lawyer's letter. This wasn't the act of a man who just walked away. This was planning. This was foresight. This was something else. "I'm going," I said. The words came out before I had even fully formed the thought. They felt like the first real decision I'd ever made. Mr. Henderson nodded slowly. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "I thought you might," he said. "Your file always said you were stubborn." He handed me a thin folder. "This is your copy. Birth certificate, social security card, records. Everything you need to prove you're you." He stood up and extended a hand. I stood and shook it. His grip was firm, dry. "Good luck, Leo. I mean that." "Thanks," I mumbled. I stuffed the lawyer's letter and the key into my jacket pocket. The weight of it felt enormous. I slung my duffel bag over my shoulder and walked out of his office, not looking back. I walked down the long, polished hallway for the last time. The smell of disinfectant seemed to fade with every step. At the heavy front doors, I paused. I could feel the cold air from outside seeping through the frame. For 10 years, this building had been my whole world, my prison and my sanctuary. Leaving it felt less like an escape and more like stepping off a cliff in the dark. I pushed the door open. The cold morning air hit my face, sharp and clean. It smelled like exhaust fumes and damp pavement and possibility. It smelled like anything but yesterday. The bus ride was a long, rumbling meditation. I sat by the window, watching the city's dense gray architecture bleed into sprawling suburbs, then into the flat brown fields of late autumn. For hours, the world outside was a blur of skeletal trees and empty farmland. I didn't listen to music. I didn't read. I just watched the miles spool out behind us, putting distance between me and the only life I could remember. My reflection in the glass was a pale, hollow-eyed ghost superimposed over the passing landscape. I tried to remember Port Blossom, but the memories were like faded photographs, bleached by time and trauma. I remembered the cry of gulls, the constant, damp chill that clung to your clothes, the rhythmic groan of the foghorn on misty nights. I remembered my grandfather's workshop, the Cooperage. The scent of it was sharp and specific in my mind. Fresh-cut oak, hot metal, and something else, something resinous and sweet like whiskey. He made barrels, huge, beautiful, sturdy barrels for the wineries and distilleries up the coast. He would let me sweep the wood shavings into piles. He called me his first mate. The official story, the one the social workers told me, was simple. He was a man under financial strain, grieving the loss of his daughter and son-in-law, and burdened with a child he wasn't prepared to raise. One day the pressure became too much and he broke. He walked away. It made sense. It was a tidy narrative. But the complexity of the trust, the lawyer, the key, it poked holes in that tidy story. It suggested a different narrative, one I wasn't sure I was ready to read. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The flat fields gave way to rolling hills, thick with pine and fir trees. The air, even through the bus's filtration system, started to smell different, sharper, salty. We crested a long hill, and suddenly there it was, the ocean. A vast, churning expanse of gray-blue water under a matching gray sky. My breath caught in my chest. I hadn't seen the ocean in 10 years. The sight of it was like a physical blow, a punch of memory that knocked the wind out of me. The bus descended into Port Blossom. It was smaller than I remembered and more weathered. The houses that dotted the hillsides were clad in faded clapboard, their paint peeled by the relentless, salty wind. The town itself was huddled around a small, natural harbor, a collection of 2- and 3-story brick buildings that looked like they'd been there for a century. They probably had. We passed a diner with a buzzing neon sign, a hardware store with a cluttered window display, a sleepy-looking tavern. Everything seemed muted, quiet, hunkered down against the coming winter. The bus hissed to a stop in front of a small storefront that served as the town's station. I was the only one who got off. I stepped onto the pavement, duffel bag in hand, and the wind hit me immediately. It was cold and wet, carrying the scent of low tide, diesel from the fishing boats, and wood smoke from someone's chimney. It was the smell of my earliest memories. I stood there for a long moment, just breathing it in, feeling like a time traveler. I didn't need a map. My feet remembered the way. I walked down the main street, my boots echoing in the quiet of the late afternoon. A few people on the sidewalk gave me a passing glance, the kind of brief, assessing look small-town folks give to a stranger. I kept my head down. I turned onto Waterfront Road. The street ran parallel to the harbor, separated from the water by a line of fishing docks and processing sheds. And there, at the far end, was the Cooperage. It was bigger than I remembered. A massive two-story structure with a gambrel roof, its gray wooden siding weathered to the color of driftwood. It stood apart from the other buildings, occupying its own piece of prime waterfront land. And it was exactly as the letter had described, sealed. The large barn-style doors on the front were boarded over with thick sheets of plywood, gray and splintered. The windows on both floors were similarly covered. It didn't look abandoned, it looked entombed. A monument to a forgotten craft, a forgotten man. A chain-link fence, topped with rust, surrounded the property, but the gate was secured with only a simple padlock. My key wasn't for that. I followed the fence line around the side of the building, my feet crunching on gravel and weeds. On the side facing away from the main road, there was a single, standard-sized door, tucked away beneath a small overhang. It was also boarded up, but the plywood was nailed over the frame, not directly across the door itself. Below the boards, a heavy-duty deadbolt lock was visible. It was old, the brass tarnished to a dark brown, but it looked solid. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I pulled the iron key from my pocket. My hand was shaking slightly as I pushed it into the lock. It resisted for a second, then slid home with a satisfying, solid clunk. I turned it. The mechanism inside was stiff from a decade of disuse. But with a surge of adrenaline, I forced it. There was a loud, grating click as the bolt retracted. It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Now for the boards. They were held in place with thick, long nails. I had no tools. I looked around, my eyes scanning the weedy ground. My gaze landed on a length of rusted rebar, half buried in the dirt near the foundation. It would have to do. I worked the end of the rebar into the gap between the plywood and the doorframe. I put my shoulder into it and pushed. The wood groaned. The nails protested with a high-pitched screech. I leaned my full weight into it, grunting with the effort. The old wood was surprisingly strong. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the cold. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't budge. It felt like the building itself was fighting me, trying to keep its secrets. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and gave one last desperate shove. With a splintering crack, the top corner of the plywood broke free. A few more minutes of wrestling and prying, and the whole sheet came away, crashing to the gravel with a hollow thud. I stood there, breathing heavily, looking at the door. It was just a plain wooden door, its dark green paint faded and peeling. It was the door to my past. I put my hand on the knob, turned it, and pushed. The door swung inward on creaking hinges, opening into perfect, absolute darkness. And from that darkness rolled a scent that stopped my heart. Old wood, dust, and the faint, ghostly sweetness of whiskey. I was home. Stepping inside was like stepping into a tomb. The air was thick, cold, and utterly still. A decade of dust had settled on every surface, a fine gray shroud that muffled all sound. The only light came from the open doorway behind me, a pale, rectangular patch on the floor that barely penetrated the gloom. I fumbled along the wall, my fingers brushing against the rough, unfinished wood, searching for a light switch. I found it. A chunky, old-fashioned toggle switch. I flicked it up. Nothing. Of course. The power had been off for 10 years. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut a sharp white cone through the darkness, illuminating a world frozen in time. I was in a small entryway. To my left was a steep, narrow staircase leading up. In front of me, a door stood ajar, leading into the main workshop. I pushed it open and stepped through. The space was cavernous. The ceiling soared 2 stories high, crisscrossed with massive wooden beams. The flashlight beam danced across the room, picking out shapes from the shadows. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in tools that lay exactly where they had been left. There were planes, adzes, draw knives, and strange, curved tools whose purpose I couldn't guess. They were all coated in that same thick layer of dust, but beneath it, I could see the dark gleam of oiled steel. Along one wall, stacks of raw oak staves stood waiting, perfectly cut and seasoned. In the center of the room, a half-finished barrel sat on a stand, its staves held together by a temporary metal hoop. It looked like my grandfather had just stepped out for lunch and would be back any minute to finish it. The silence was profound. It was the silence of a place that had been waiting. My light caught something on the far wall. I walked toward it, my footsteps the only sound, the dust puffing up around my ankles. It was a calendar, a promotional one from a local lumber supplier. The picture was a cheesy shot of a waterfall. The month was October. The year was a decade ago. A single day was circled in red pen, the 23rd. The day he disappeared, my birthday. He hadn't just gone out for groceries. He had marked the day. The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I swept the flashlight beam around the room again. This was his life, his work. The air itself felt saturated with his presence. I could almost hear the scrape of a plane on wood, the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a hammer on a metal hoop. I ran my hand along a workbench, leaving a clean streak in the dust. Beneath it, the wood was smooth, worn, scarred with the marks of countless projects. I felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of grief. Not for the man who abandoned me, but for the man who had lived here, in this space. The man I barely knew. The man I had lost twice, once to his disappearance, and once to the bitter story I had told myself to survive. To the right of the main workshop was another door, this one solid and closed. It had a small, frosted glass window at eye level, the kind you see on an office door. The words A. Vance, Prop, were painted on the glass in flaking gold leaf. His office. I tried the handle. Locked. This lock was newer, a standard pin tumbler lock, not the old iron one on the side door. The key I had didn't fit. I rattled the knob in frustration, but it was solid. Whatever secrets this place held, they were likely in there. I went back to the front of the building, to the large, boarded-up barn doors. From the inside, I could see how they were secured. Not just with the plywood on the outside, but with a massive wooden beam dropped into heavy iron brackets on the inside. It was a barricade. He hadn't just sealed the building, he had fortified it. Why? What was he so afraid of? My light fell on a small pile of mail on the floor, just inside the main doors, pushed through a slot I hadn't noticed from the outside. It was all junk mail, flyers, and official-looking envelopes from the township, probably tax notices. All of them 10 years old. I nudged the pile with my foot. Underneath it was a single, smaller envelope. It was different from the others. It was crisp, white, and had no stamp. Just my name, Leo, written on the front in a strong, slanted hand. My grandfather's handwriting. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The seal was unbroken. It had been sitting here on this dusty floor for 10 years, waiting for me. I ripped it open. Inside was a single folded sheet of notepaper. "Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I'm gone. It means my plan worked, at least in part. It means you are 18 and you have come back. I am so sorry. Those are the first words I need you to hear. I am sorry for leaving you. But I need you to know with all my heart that I did not abandon you." I had to stop reading. I leaned against the cold wall, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. I read the sentence again. I did not abandon you. The words were a crack in the foundation of my entire life. There are things you don't know, son. Things I couldn't tell a child. Our town, this beautiful, rugged place, has a dark underbelly. It always has. Smuggling, bad debts, men who operate outside the law. I got tangled up in it, not by choice. Years ago, when your grandmother was sick, the medical bills they were a mountain I couldn't climb. I made a bad deal. I borrowed money from the wrong people. I thought I could work my way out of it, that I could pay it back and be free. But that's not how it works with men like that. The debt only grows. They own you. When your parents died and you came to live with me, you became my whole world. You were a light in a very dark time. But you were also leverage. They knew it. They started making threats, not just against me, against you. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let their poison touch you. So I made a different plan, a plan to get you out, to keep you safe until you were old enough, strong enough to make your own choices. The Cooperage is yours. I've set it up that way, but the wolves are still out there. They think this property is worthless, rotting away. They think I fled with nothing. That's the story I wanted them to believe. Inside my office, you will find everything you need to understand. The door is locked for a reason. You are always good at puzzles, Leo. Think like a Cooper. Where does a man who builds containers hide the most important thing? Be careful. Be smart, and know that every single day for the last 10 years, wherever I am, I have been thinking of you. You are my legacy, not these barrels, you. Your grandfather, Arthur. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, the letter clutched in my hand. The dusty air felt hard to breathe. I cried, not quiet, dignified tears, but ragged, choking sobs. I cried for the 8-year-old boy left alone in an apartment that smelled like fish. I cried for the 10 years of bitterness and anger I had carried like a shield. I cried for my grandfather, a man who hadn't been a coward, but a protector. A man who had sacrificed everything for me, and I had spent a decade hating him for it. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on me in the cold, silent dark of the workshop. When the tears finally subsided, a new feeling began to surface, a cold, hard ember of determination. "Think like a Cooper," the words echoed in my head. Where does a man who builds containers hide the most important thing? I stood up, my legs stiff. I wiped my face on the sleeve of my jacket and picked up my phone, the flashlight beam now a weapon against the shadows. I looked around the workshop, my eyes seeing it differently now. It wasn't just a dusty relic, it was a puzzle, a message in a bottle. My eyes landed on the half-finished barrel in the center of the room, a container. I walked over to it. It was a large hogshead barrel, maybe 60 gallons. The oak staves were perfectly shaped, beveled at the edges to fit together snugly. A temporary metal hoop held the top half together, while the bottom flared out, not yet cinched into place. It was a work in progress. But why this one? There were other finished barrels stacked against a wall. Why leave this one in the middle of the floor? I ran my hand over the staves. They were smooth, sanded. I shone the light inside. It was just an empty wooden shell. I tapped on the sides. They sounded solid. I was about to move on when my light caught something. A subtle difference in the wood grain on one of the staves. It was almost imperceptible. A faint, straight line near the bottom edge that ran against the natural curve of the grain. A seam. My heart started to pound again. I examined it closer. It wasn't a crack. It was a perfectly executed cut. I pressed on it. Nothing. I tried to slide it. Nothing. I thought about the tools on the workbench. A cooper doesn't just use hammers and saws. They use pressure, heat, steam. They bend the wood to their will. How would you open a hidden compartment in a barrel stave? I looked back at the workbenches. My light landed on a cooper's hammer. It had a flat face on one side and a sharp, thin peen on the other, used for tapping hoops. Beside it was a block of beeswax. An idea sparked. Heat. I didn't have a forge, but I had a lighter. I took it from my pocket. It was a long shot, a crazy idea. But my grandfather's letter had made the world feel a little crazy. I flicked the lighter and held the small flame to the block of wax until a clear drop fell onto the almost invisible seam. Then I held the flame directly to the wood, just below the seam. I had to be careful not to scorch it. I held it there for a minute, the wood warming under the flame. Then I took the cooper's hammer. I didn't hit it. I just used the handle, the way you'd use a lever, pressing the end firmly against the top of the stave while I pushed on the bottom with my other hand. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a faint click, the bottom section of the stave slid inward. It was a hidden drawer, no more than an inch deep and a foot long, perfectly concealed within the thickness of the wood. And inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a small brass key. It wasn't an old iron key like the one for the side door. This one was small, modern. The key to an office door. I felt a giddy sense of triumph. I had solved his puzzle. I took the key and walked to the office. It slid into the lock as if it were made for it. I turned it, and the lock clicked open. I pushed the door and stepped inside. The office was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. There was a large, sturdy wooden desk, a filing cabinet, and a wall of bookshelves crammed with volumes on woodworking, history, and engineering. A thick layer of dust covered everything here, too, but the room felt different. It felt like the heart of the whole operation. My flashlight beam fell on the desk. On the center of the blotter, placed with deliberate care, was a large gray metal box. It was a fireproof deed box, the kind people use to store important documents. It was closed, but not locked. My breath hitched. This was it. Inside my office, you will find everything you need to understand. I lifted the lid. The hinges creaked in the silence. The box was full. On the very top was a thick stack of envelopes, bound together with twine. They were all addressed to me in my grandfather's hand. One for each year I was gone. A lifetime of letters he could never send. Beneath the letters, I could see the corner of something else. A thick, leather-bound ledger. I sat down in the dusty office chair, the springs groaning under my weight. I placed the metal box on the desk in front of me. For a moment, I just stared at it. This box contained the truth, the real story, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. What if the truth was worse than the lie I'd been living? What if it asked something of me I couldn't give? Have you ever stood at a crossroads like that? A moment where you know that once you take the next step, nothing will ever be the same again. You can feel the weight of your own life hanging in the balance. For years, I had been a passenger. The system moved me from one place to another. Life happened to me. But sitting there, in that cold, dark office, I realized I was finally in the driver's seat. I could close this box, walk out of the Cooperage, sell it for the back taxes, and disappear. I could take the safe path Mr. Henderson had offered. Or I could open these letters and inherit not just a building, but a history, a responsibility, a fight. If you've ever faced a moment like that, a choice that defines who you are, I want you to let me know in the comments. I read them all, because these are the moments that make us. They're terrifying, but they're also where we find our strength. It's a community of people here who understand that. People who have had to make the hard choices. I took a deep breath. I untied the twine and picked up the first letter, the one on top. It was thicker than the rest. I unfolded the pages, my phone's light illuminating the familiar, strong script. "My dearest Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, then you are a man now, and you have found your way back. I hope the world has been kinder to you than I was forced to be. I want to tell you the whole story, not just the part about the debt. The part about what this place, this Cooperage, really is. Our family has been in Port Blossom for generations. We weren't always Coopers. My great-grandfather was a fisherman, but he saw a need. The town was growing, and the wineries and distilleries needed good barrels. So he built this place. He built it with his own hands. But he also built it with a secret. During Prohibition, this Cooperage was a key part of the town's other economy. The barrels that left this workshop didn't always hold fish or pickles. Sometimes they held whiskey, smuggled down from Canada. My great-grandfather wasn't a gangster. He was a pragmatist. He was helping his neighbors survive. He created a system, a way of moving things, hidden in plain sight. The office you're sitting in? It has a false floor. Under your feet is a cellar. Not a big one, but big enough. That's where they hid the real product. The secret got passed down from father to son, not because we were criminals, but as an insurance policy, a way to protect the family, to protect the town if times got hard. When I took over, the smuggling was long over. The cellar was just a story, a piece of family lore. I never thought I would have to use it. My eyes darted to the floor. It was covered with a worn, threadbare rug. I kicked it aside. The floorboards looked normal, solid. I got on my hands and knees, my light scanning the planks. Just as he said, there was a seam, a section of flooring, about 4 feet square, that was cut differently. There were no visible nails. I ran my fingers along the edge, searching for a latch, a handle, anything. Nothing. I went back to the letter. The mechanism is simple. On the bookshelf, there is a copy of Moby Dick, the big, leather-bound one. Pull it. Not out. Down. I turned to the bookshelf. It was packed tight. My light found the spine. Moby Dick. It was a beautiful old edition, the leather cracked with age. I put my fingers on the top of the spine and pushed down. It resisted, then slid down about an inch with a heavy mechanical click. Across the room, one edge of the square section of floor popped up by a fraction of an inch. A trap door. I pried it open with my fingers. It was heavy, made of thick wood reinforced with steel. It lifted up on counterweighted hinges to reveal a dark, square opening and a steep wooden ladder leading down. A wave of cool, musty air, smelling of damp earth and something else, something vaguely alcoholic, like the ghost of spilled whiskey, rose to meet me. I shone my light down. It was a small, stone-lined cellar, just as he'd described. And in the center of the cellar sat a single, large, military-style footlocker. I finished the letter before I went down. The debt I told you about in the other note was real, but I paid it, in full. The man I owed, a local shark named Silas Croft, didn't like that. Men like him don't want their money back. They want the power it gives them. When I paid him off, I took away his leverage. He couldn't own me anymore. So he decided to destroy me instead. He framed me. He was running a more modern smuggling operation. Not whiskey, but stolen electronics, counterfeit goods. He used one of my shipments, a truckload of barrels headed south, to move a hot cargo without my knowledge. Then he tipped off the feds. He made it look like I was the mastermind. I got a warning from a friend inside the Port Authority. I had 12 hours before they came for me. 12 hours to disappear. I could have just run, but Croft would have come after you, or he would have taken the Cooperage. I couldn't let him have it. This place is our history. So I did the only thing I could think of. I used the old family secret. In that footlocker, you will find 2 things. The first is the ledger from my grandfather. It details the real smuggling network from the Prohibition days, the routes, the names, the hiding places, all up and down the coast. It's history, but it's dangerous history. Many of those families are still here. The second thing you will find is a new ledger, my ledger. For the last 2 years before I left, I was tracking Silas Croft. I gathered evidence, shipping manifests, witness accounts, photographs, proof of everything he was doing. It's all in there. It's enough to put him away for a very long time. This is your inheritance, Leo. It's not a building or a debt. It's a choice. In the footlocker, there is also a cash box. It contains $50,000. Clean money. Money I saved, legally, over 30 years. It's yours. You can take that money, take the ledgers, and walk away. Go to the police in a different state. Give them the evidence on Croft anonymously. He'll go to jail, and you'll be free. You can start a new life anywhere. No one would ever know you were here. Or you can stay. You can use that money to pay the back taxes. You can fight the seizure. You can reopen the Cooperage. You can put our name, the Vance name, back on the front of this building. But if you do that, you're making a stand. You're telling the world that we are not a family that runs. Croft is old now. He may not even be a threat anymore, but his kind of poison lingers. Staying is the harder path. It's the path of work and risk and memory. I can't tell you which one to choose. A father's job is to give his son a safe harbor. A grandfather's job, I think, is to give his grandson a choice. The choice to decide what kind of man he wants to be. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. You were the best part of my life. I let the letter fall to the desk. My legs felt weak. I sat on the edge of the trap door, my feet on the top rung of the ladder. $50,000. An escape. A clean slate. Everything a boy aging out of the system could ever dream of. A get-out-of-jail-free card for a life that had felt like a prison. All I had to do was take the box, walk away, and let this place, this town, this history, crumble into dust. It was the sensible choice, the logical choice. But as I sat there, I could feel the building around me, the solidness of the old beams, the faint scent of oak. I thought of my grandfather, alone, with 12 hours to save his life and mine. He didn't just run. He built a fortress. He left a map. He left an armory. He didn't just give me an escape route. He gave me the keys to the kingdom. He trusted me. He trusted me to be smart enough to find the key, strong enough to open the door, and wise enough to make the right choice. For 10 years, I had believed I was worthless, abandoned refuse of a broken family. But my grandfather had believed I was a king waiting to claim his castle. The anger I'd felt, the rage, was gone. The grief was still there, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, burning love for this man I had so profoundly misunderstood. He had given me more than a choice. He had given me back my own story. He had reframed abandonment as protection. He had turned a flight for his life into an act of profound faith in me. How could I honor that faith by running? How could I take his legacy, his sacrifice, and sell it for a bus ticket out of town? I climbed down the ladder. The cellar was cold, the air still. The footlocker was heavy. I didn't open it down there. I wrestled it up the ladder and into the office. I opened it. It was all there, just as he'd said. The old leather-bound ledger, its pages filled with elegant, faded script. The new black ledger, its columns filled with my grandfather's angry, precise handwriting. And a metal cash box. I opened it. It was full of $100 bills, neatly wrapped in paper bands. $50,000. It looked like a fortune. It was a fortune. It was my future. I closed the lid of the footlocker. I looked at the cash. Then I looked at the lawyer's letter, still sitting on the desk with its impossible, suffocating number. The back taxes. The number wasn't impossible anymore. It was just a number. The money in this box could make that problem disappear, but it would also make the money disappear. It would leave me with nothing but a building, a craft I didn't know, and the ghost of a threat. It was a terrible business decision. It was the only choice I could make. The next morning I walked into the office of Albright and Associates. It was a small, tidy office on the second floor of one of the old brick buildings downtown. A woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair the color of salt and pepper looked up from her desk. She was probably in her late 60s, with a calm, no-nonsense air about her. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm Leo Vance," I said. Her composure broke for just a second. Her eyes widened, and a complex series of emotions played across her face. Surprise, relief, and a deep, weary sadness. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice softer now. I'm so glad you came. Please, sit down." I sat. She just looked at me for a long moment. "You have his eyes," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure you'd want any part of this." "I got your letter," I said, getting straight to the point. "And the key." "Yes," she said, folding her hands on her desk. She was all business again.
The tax situation is precarious, Leo. The township has been patient, largely out of respect for Arthur, but that patience has run out. We have 60 days, maybe less, before they file for seizure.
I want to pay them, I said. She blinked.
I'm sorry?
The back taxes. I want to pay them. She leaned forward, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern.
Leo, the amount is over $40,000. Do you understand that?
I understand, I said. I unzipped my duffel bag, which I had placed on the floor beside me. I pulled out the metal cash box and set it on her desk with a heavy thud. I opened the lid. Evelyn Albright stared at the stacks of $100 bills. She was speechless. She looked from the money to my face and back again.
Where did you get this?
She whispered, her voice laced with suspicion. He left it for me, I said simply. Clean money, for this purpose. She didn't ask how or where. She just looked at me, and I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She had been his friend. She must have known he was a man of secrets, a man of careful plans. She slowly reached out and touched one of the stacks of bills, as if to confirm it was real.
He really thought of everything,
she murmured, more to herself than to me. She looked up, her professional mask back in place, but her eyes were shining.
All right, Leo Vance, let's go save your property.
The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Evelyn was a whirlwind of efficiency. She dealt with the township, negotiating the final payment and getting the paperwork filed. She got the power turned back on at the Cooperage. She was calm, pragmatic, and fiercely protective of me. She never asked about the details of how I found the money. She just accepted it, a quiet partner in my grandfather's last plan. While she handled the legal battle, I started my own war against a decade of decay. The first order of business was cleaning. I spent days, weeks, just sweeping. The dust was thick, an archaeological layer. As I cleared it away, the workshop slowly came back to life. The true color of the wooden floors, the gleam of the tools, the grain of the stacked staves. It was backbreaking, monotonous work. But with every shovelful of dust and debris I carted out, I felt like I was clearing away the dust from my own soul. I was making the place mine. I moved into the small apartment above the workshop. It was just a couple of rooms, with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom. It was where he had lived after I was taken away. It was as dusty and neglected as the rest of the building. But as I cleaned it, I found more traces of him. A shelf of worn paperback novels. A collection of records, mostly old jazz and sea shanties. In a drawer, I found a photo album. It was full of pictures of me as a little boy. Me on my grandfather's shoulders, me helping in the workshop. Me on a fishing boat, holding up a tiny fish with a proud grin. He hadn't just kept the pictures, he had curated them. He had built a shrine to a memory. The work was slow. The building needed repairs. A section of the roof leaked. Some of the windows were broken behind their plywood shields. I used the last of the money from the cash box to buy lumber, shingles, and glass. I wasn't a carpenter. I wasn't a roofer. But my grandfather had left me a library. I spent my nights in his office, under the glow of a single bare bulb, reading his books. Books on joinery, on framing, on building. I learned. I made mistakes. I split boards. I hit my thumb with the hammer more times than I could count. But slowly, painstakingly, the Cooperage started to heal. And so did I. The town watched me. At first, it was with suspicion. I was a stranger, an outsider who had inherited the old, derelict Vance place. But they saw the light on at night. They saw the smoke curling from the chimney of the wood stove I'd gotten working. They saw me hauling out trash and hauling in lumber. The owner of the hardware store, a gruff man named Mr. Peterson, started giving me advice on which nails to use. The woman who ran the diner, a kind, bustling woman named Sarah, would pack me an extra sandwich with my coffee in the morning. They didn't ask questions, they just watched and helped in their own small ways. I wasn't one of them, not yet, but I was no longer just a ghost. One day, I decided it was time. I had cleaned the tools, sharpened them. I had read every book my grandfather had on the art of coopering. I took one of the seasoned oak staves from the stack. I carried it to the workbench. I picked up a draw knife. I remembered the feel of it from when I was a child, the way my grandfather would let me hold it. I took a deep breath and made the first cut. The wood curled away from the blade with a soft sigh. The scent of fresh-cut oak filled the air. It was clumsy. My lines weren't straight, but it was a start. I was building something. I was continuing his work. The ledgers sat in the footlocker in the cellar. I hadn't taken them to the police. Not yet. That was a battle for another day. My grandfather's letter had said Silas Croft was old. I'd asked Ms. Albright about him, casually. She told me he had sold off his businesses a few years back and retired. He was still in town, a wealthy recluse. The threat felt distant, dormant. For now, my fight wasn't with him. It was with the wood. It was with the silence. It was with myself. Months passed. Autumn gave way to a wet, cold winter. The Cooperage was no longer a tomb. It was a workshop again. I had repaired the roof. I had replaced the windows. I had even, after dozens of failed attempts, completed my first barrel. It was small, a little lopsided, and it probably wouldn't hold water. But it was mine. I had made it. I stood it in the center of the room, right where my grandfather's half-finished barrel had been. It was a symbol, a promise. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside. A man in an expensive suit got out. He had the polished, predatory look of a city developer. He had a briefcase in his hand. He walked right up to the front doors, which were now clear of boards, and knocked. I opened the door. "Leo Vance?" he asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Yes." "My name is Jonathan Pike. I represent the Trident Development Group," he said, extending a hand. I didn't take it. "We've been interested in this property for some time. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer. An offer that would allow you to walk away from all this and start a new, comfortable life." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. It was a contract. I could see the number at the top. It had a lot of zeros. It was more money than the back taxes. It was more money than my grandfather had left me. It was a fortune. The easy path. The escape route offered up on a silver platter. I looked past him at the gray water of the harbor. I looked back into the workshop at my lopsided barrel, at the clean workbenches, at the light glinting off the sharpened tools. I thought about the feel of the draw knife in my hand. I thought about my grandfather's face in the photographs. "This place isn't for sale," I said. The developer's smile tightened. "Mr. Vance, be reasonable. This is a life-changing amount of money. What are you going to do with this place? Make barrels? It's a dead trade." "Maybe," I said, "but it's my trade. It's my home." I closed the door in his face. I went back to my workbench, picked up a fresh stave of oak, and got to work. That was the moment I truly understood what my grandfather had given me. It wasn't the building. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the evidence against his enemy. It was the chance to build something, A home isn't a place you inherit. It's a place you create. It's the work you put in, the splinters you get, the leaks you fix. It's the choice to stay when it would be easier to leave. He hadn't left me a ruin. He had left me a foundation. He knew I would have to build the rest myself. He knew that was the only way it would ever truly be mine. The Cooperage stands on the edge of the water, a stubborn gray sentinel against the wind. The light is on inside. There's a new sign above the door, hand-painted. It just says, Vance & Son, Coopers. The "and son" is a tribute, a fiction, a promise. I'm not just his grandson anymore. I am his partner, his legacy. The barrels I make are getting better. They're straight and strong. They hold water. Some of the local wineries have started placing small orders. It's not a fortune, but it's a living. It's a life. A life I chose. A life I built. My story started with an ending. The end of my childhood. The end of my time in the system. But it was really a beginning. It was the first day of the rest of my life. And I learned that the most valuable inheritance isn't something you can spend. It's a purpose. It's a reason to get up in the morning and fight, even when it's hard. It's the chance to take something broken and make it whole again. What about you? What have you had to rebuild in your life? What broken thing did you decide to fix instead of throwing away? It could be a relationship, a career, a dream, or even just your own sense of self-worth. Share your story in the comments below, because this channel, this community, is for the builders, the fixers, the ones who know that home isn't just a place you find, but a thing you make. Thank you for listening, and if my story meant something to you, please subscribe. There are so many more stories to tell.